I like to claim that I'm the descendant of a poor refugee from North Africa. My mother's maiden name is Gadala. The great-great-great-grandfather of my mother, Theodore Gadala, was born in Farshut, in Upper Egypt in 1785, a city which today still has less than 60,000 inhabitants. He arrived at 16 years old with a group of a few hundred men, women, and children in Marseille in October 1801, after sailing on English boats with the French army as it retreated from Egypt. A soldier in the Coptic legion of Bonaparte's army, he later described himself as a Mamluk of the Imperial Guard. The young Theodore was part of men who had thrown in their lot with Napoleon's army in Egypt, and who feared local retaliation once it withdrew. The group included many Christians of Coptic Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Melkite Catholic, and Armenian background. They also included Muslims, some Mamluks or military slaves who had been born in places like Georgia, where the Ottoman Empire extracted recruits. Not many were really Egyptians, but their common language was Arabic. Like many refugees, even nowadays, they thought it would be a temporary situation, a few months at most, that soon the French would win Egypt again from the Turks or the British. General Yaqub, their Coptic leader, had even drawn up a plan to reinvade and liberate Egypt from Turkish occupation. But he tragically died during the trip to Marseille, putting an abrupt end to the plan and collapsing the political hopes of these refugees. No longer political exiles, they now face permanent resettlement in France. Before I tell you the fate of my ancestor Theodore and his companions, I wanted to start this talk by highlighting that my intent is not to make a simplistic rebuke to a complex issue. I do not want to minimize the difficulties of building a multicultural society in France. In many ways, the French elites always underestimate the tensions between the majority and various minorities in the country, whether it is women, homosexuals, Arabs, Jewish, or socioeconomic minorities. Instead of admitting some level of failure in working towards a cohesive society and come up with strong, courageous, and innovative solutions to remedy these problems, many just repeat the vivre ensemble or living together motto like a mantra, hoping things will get better while simultaneously not doing anything to address the situation. Yet, as our fellow Karina Peiser highlighted earlier today, the situation can be very dire. Exactly a year ago, I joined in Dublin a small group of LGBTI politicians for a weekend on the occasion of the launch of my friend Andrew Reynolds' book, The Children of Harvey Milk, which discusses how lesbian and gay people achieve progress through getting elected to office. During the weekend, Gabriel Magni of Loyola Marymount University presented results of a 2018 study on whether voters still penalize gay and trans candidates. He had conducted original surveys experiments with nationally representative samples in France, the United States, United Kingdom, and New Zealand. Well, as I was watching the French slide, I was struck by the data. The prejudice against Muslim candidates is today stronger than prejudice against gays or even transgender candidates. To me, as an LGBTI activist, it is truly alarming and the signs of things to come. So my point today is more to highlight that the current panic around Islam, the at times hysterical focus on Arab immigration and its link to terrorism, highlighted in the presentation of Karina Peiser today, deserve to be placed in the long history of fear linked to immigration, the erasure of a French identity, and France's glorious past. Back to Marseille. In 1801, Theodore, after a 40-day stint in quarantine in the Lazaret of Marseille, joined the Egyptian refugees in settling together in a section of the city called Le Cours Gouffé, in the neighborhood of Castellane. It is difficult to estimate the size of this community of Egyptian refugees across the period, but it is estimated to be around 1,000 people in 1817, or 1% of the entire population of Marseille. Here's a short description of the Cours Gouffé at the time, which I wanted to read to you, and which describes perfectly how it kind of became a Levantine island in the city of Marseille. What a curious picture that this fragment of Egypt transported as a piece of bas-relief in a French city. The Egyptians had their Egyptian merchants, their Egyptian tailors. They ate as in Cairo and slept fully clothed as in Cairo under mosquito nets. They did not need to buy mosquitoes. Marseille gave them enough of them. And as soon as they felt home, they resumed an existence of idleness characteristic of the wise East. The conversation under the plane trees, theological discussions under the vines, the horizontal life, the pipe in the mouth. The men slept during the day, the women sang toward the evening, touching romances without words. A few of these refugees left Marseille and the Courgouffé and headed to Paris with the authorization of the administration. That's what my ancestor Theodore did, and he joined the French army in Boulogne-sur-Mer, where Napoleon was planning to invade England, until Trafalgar put a damper on his hopes. Theodore settled there and fathered a son out of wedlock in Boulogne in 1811, with a countrywoman of modest social class, a widow who probably catered to the many soldiers in the camp. Like all the Egyptian refugees, Theodore received a 1 franc 60 a day pension for the rest of his life. Later, in Paris, Theodore started working as a sommelier for James of Rothschild. The Rothschilds covered the education of Joseph, his son, in Frankfurt, and Joseph later worked for them as they invested in mining in Spain in the late 1830s. Eventually, Joseph associated himself with them in a gold refinery business and married the daughter of a Rothschild associate called Grégoire Saint-André. Joseph's son, my mother's great-grandfather, also named Theodore Theodore Charles Gadala, made a fortune in a brokerage firm that bore his name. The rest is history. His descendants married into other prominent banking families, the Veracs, the Enrots, the Langlais. My great-grandmother, Gabrielle Gadala, born Fleury, was the daughter, as an example, of a prominent senator from Normandy. In short, we became more French than the French. Meanwhile, of the Egyptian families left in the Courgouffé, virtually isolated from the French population, many of them were murdered during the White Terror of June 1815, a term that is used to designate a vengeance by the royalists on imperial forces after the failed return of Napoleon from Elba, les 100 Jours. It is difficult to establish how many were killed in the massacre. Researchers have found evidence that at least 12 were killed in the first day, though it is suggested that only those who belonged to influential families were reported. Already a writer at the time distinguished between the Copts, who carried an honorable commerce in the town, and the hordes of miserable Negroes and Moors, the scum of the human species who had lived from Bonaparte crumbs. Perhaps more tellingly, in 1816, a return incentive program, the advance payment of 1 year's pension, was put in place to incentivize the remaining families to return to Egypt. It illustrates how their treatment has always been based on their usefulness to the state, which meant, above all, to Napoleon himself rather than their refugee status. This Egyptian community paid a high price for its conspicuous closeness to the regime. Back in Egypt, during the reign of Mehmet Ali, however, many of these refugees, accompanied by their sons, young people that had been trained in France, are said to have contributed to important developments in the country, such as the construction of the Suez Canal. At home in New York, I have a framed large costume engraving, which is titled The Mamluk and the Sailors from Alexandria. It was drawn by André Duterte during the Egypt campaign. So obviously I'm fascinated by the story of this Egyptian ancestor. First, because my mother and I have always considered ourselves as uber Parisian. And I've been told so many times in the past 19 years here in the United States that I'm quintessential French, pessimistic, pale, and rebellious. So there is something strange in acknowledging that my mother's maiden name, Gadala, was probably given to our ancestor who did not have a family name like most Levantines, on his arrival to France by a clerk less than 200 years ago. We are rather new French. But it is also a symbol to me of the role of migrants in French history, which has begun recently to be acknowledged. Strikingly, many among my family members who today deplore the incompatibility of immigrants of Middle Eastern descent with the French culture are themselves descendants of a poor, uneducated Egyptian refugee. Indeed, reading carefully through the few papers remaining from Theodore and Joseph, it appears that this Egyptian identity was only very rarely claimed by my ancestors, only when it came to asking for the pension or avoiding national service in 1830. And maybe that is a somber lesson. This strange concept that integration in the French identity happened in my family through complete abandon of their own identity and the erasure of their past. Until all differences are fully erased, the French remain suspicious of minorities. Another lesson was that his integration, the integration of Theodore, took place through his role in the military, and that was always the socializing force in France. And in fact, if you pay attention, France began a trial in June of a compulsory civil service for teens based on this notion. Before the current focus on Arab immigration, it was the Italians, as an example, that the French stigmatized, using similar terms at the end of the 19th century against Italian barbarism. I wanted to read to you an abstract from a 1903 pamphlet on the invasion of foreigners in France, which echoes a lot of the current rhetoric against Muslim families. The number of foreigners of all conditions who currently live with us can be evaluated without fear. 1.8 million, or nearly 5% of the total population. Barely 60,000 live off their income or have money. The others, more than 1.7 million, take us, while escaping most of the burdens on our nationals. In some cities, in Marseille for example, most of the big factories have eliminated from their staff to the last of our nationals. The invasion of the Italians spreads rapidly to all Provence. In Toulon, the evil rages with as much violence as in Marseille. All the reject of the 5 parts of the world can acquire the quality of French citizen. Better still, the legislator of 1889 imposed the quality of French on people who until then the chance of a French birth simply granted the faculty of an option. The inevitable result of this law has been that naturalization have increased tenfold. Current racist comments against Arabs also recall anti-Semitism in France through the ages. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician and Catholic theologian, wrote as an example in the 1600s, "Surprising thing to see these Jewish people subsist for so many years, to see it always miserable, being necessary for the proof of Jesus Christ, and that he remains to prove it, and that he is miserable since they crucified him." In 1939, in La France Enchaînée, a newspaper close to nationalist writer Charles Maurras, one could read, "The Jews conquered France. Piece by piece, flap by flap. They were 1,000, they are 1,000,000. They ruined the inhabitants, the real ones. They looted everything, rotten everything, destroyed everything." French chauvinism and its colonial past are also a factor that cannot be ignored in looking at the explanation for the current xenophobia. France's cultural dominance, especially over countries of Southern Europe, and their occupation of Northern Africa colonies, are another contributing factor to this great difficulty in dealing with minorities from these regions. Yet that same history highlights that the destiny of France and the rest of the world are increasingly linked. A few days ago, France paid homage to 13 soldiers killed while fighting Islamic State-affiliated extremists in Mali, with their coffins draped in the French tricolor at a solemn ceremony in Paris. This was France's highest military death toll since 1983, when 58 paratroopers were killed in a truck bombing in Lebanon. The risk for the French, though, is to isolate racism against Arabs and Muslims from all the other forms of hatred against minorities that we observe globally, whether it is the Batwa people in Congo, the Dalit people in India, the Roma people in Europe, the African American here in the United States, or the homosexuals in all parts of the world. Whether it is your skin color, your ethnicity, your religion, your sexual orientation, or your gender identity, hatred and oppression of one who is different or more vulnerable is unfortunately the oldest and most mundane story in the world. The solution is to continue to oppose facts to prejudice. I like to think that my ancestor Theodore has given much to France. Many descendants who died for their country, businessmen who contributed to the formation of large industrial groups, a horse, Year 3, which won the Grand Steeplechase of Paris 3 times, and an impressive collection an impressive collection of Impressionist paintings, some of which is now at the Met, and I visit regularly with my son. My own grandfather, Jack Gadala, too, whose courage during the Second World War I recently highlighted. And finally, yours truly. The idea that whatever your politics or struggle, the color of your skin, the language that you speak, the faith you hold close, no matter whom you love, you have something unique and crucial to contribute as a Frenchman. Thank you.